This is A Word, a podcast from Slate. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. All good things must come to an end. And today, listeners, we're wrapping up our run of A Word at Slate with a special episode that features some of our best work, not just the news and politics, but also all the stars.
I was like a regular person. I blew up 3 or 4 times before I actually blew up.
You just have to at least try. Take one leap and go at your own pace.
Do I just want to give them an answer, or do I want to go on a journey together?
The best of our show and what we're doing next coming up on A Word with me, Jason Johnson. Stay with us.
Hey, aren't you that PBM?
Middleman, at your service, doctor.
Don't you get rebates that save money on medicines?
Oh, PBMs like me get big rebates.
So why do patients tell me they're worried about their costs?
No one says we have to share the savings with patients.
Congress should make sure medicine savings go directly to patients, not middlemen. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by pharma.
When you're on the go and it's time to refresh your energy, grab an ice-cold Celsius, where 0 sugar, 7 essential vitamins, and proven ingredients meet pure refreshment. Unlike traditional energy drinks, each sip of Celsius is a perfect balance of flavor and function. So whether you're hitting the gym, the office, or your next adventure, grab a Celsius at your local retailer or visit Celsius.com to learn more.
Welcome to A Word, a podcast about race and politics and everything else. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. This is an extra special episode of A Word in that it's our last as part of Slate. We're proud of the conversations we've shared over the years, and as we prepare for the future, I think it's important to take a listen to how we started. Lots of Americans knew Trump supporters wouldn't take his election loss well. I knew. And so no one was surprised when thousands of them responded to his call and came to Washington to protest the counting of Electoral College ballots on January 6th. But few were prepared for this. What you heard was part of the very first episode of A Word podcast back in February of 2021. Our guest was security analyst and expert Malcolm Nance, and it was just 1 month after the January 6th insurrection. It all seems like a lifetime ago, as everything from COVID mask battles to pre-Elon Twitter and Beyonce's Renaissance tour fade into a cloudy past that frankly seems innocent compared to what we may be facing in the near future under Trump 2.0. I mention all this because over the years, we've grown as a community on A Word. Close to 200 episodes, millions, seriously, millions of downloads and streams, thanks to you, and a wide variety of topics and guests. We've learned and worried together, laughed and cheered, and we've seen some of these stories ebb and flow over time. We've even seen some of these stories disappear from the news and others come roaring back. At the same time, we've seen rapid changes across the media landscape, from writers' strikes and actors' strikes to the rise of AI to massive layoffs across various news sites, which, in the immortal words of Thanos from Avengers Age of Ultron, gave me an idea.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
I'm working on plans for A Word's next chapter, and I will tell you what those plans are at the end of today's show. But for now, we're going to take a trip through some of my favorite interviews, funniest guests, and hottest topics. We're going to lead our retrospective by looking at the way we've covered some of the issues that are not strictly speaking about politics. But behind every headline issue is a person, someone whose life, work, or family has been changed forever. We'll start with a topic that's in the headlines and close to my heart: diversity in the media. Jim Trotter is an award-winning sports writer for The Athletic who joined our show to discuss his firing and subsequent lawsuit against the NFL. He spent years fighting for the league to honestly address the racism of some of its most powerful owners and teams. And he explained to us why the lack of diversity in the press room makes addressing these issues nearly impossible.
If we have a league in which the wealth of these billionaire owners is built on the backs of Black labor, and Black people don't have representation at the highest levels in the decision-making process, that's a problem. And so I just kept bringing it up, and I kept bringing it up internally. That's the thing people don't realize. They see me ask the question of the commissioner, and they think it was one of those gotcha moments. Well, it wasn't. How is it that we can have a newsroom where we have no Black managers, no Black copy editors, and no full-time Black news assistants, and yet say we are fairly and accurately covering this player population? You can't.
What I loved about that conversation is that Jim was incredibly brave with us. And he talked about the challenges of being a really successful writer in a league where, again, you've got majority of Black people who are performing in the league and the stars of the league and now even the quarterbacks of the league. And yet you're hard pressed to find Black people in positions of importance. I wanted to go back to the story because it's kind of a success story. Trotter was fired. His contract was not renewed because he had the audacity to ask some real questions of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. And the result was not only was he hired at The Athletic, but his lawsuit was settled. And look, when you're talking about an entity as big as the NFL, settling a lawsuit is still success. Just ask Colin Kaepernick. But Jim didn't stop there. He wasn't just satisfied with settling a lawsuit. He's decided to dedicate a large amount of the money that he got in this settlement to establishing scholarships in sports journalism at HBCUs across the country. That's the kind of story that I'm really happy about the result. I'm really happy that we covered, and I'm really happy that Award was the kind of place where he felt he could be honest and get a fair shake to talk about what happened to him. One of the critical issues that has shaped our podcast is police brutality, the consequences that can follow victims and the wider community for years to come. We've talked to victims of police brutality. We've talked to advocates who fight against police brutality. We've talked to elected officials who are dealing with police on a regular basis. But in all of those, probably one of the most meaningful conversations that I've had on this podcast was back in 2023. We spoke to a man named Leon Ford. At the age of 19, Ford was stopped by police in Pittsburgh who mistook him for a criminal suspect. He was shot multiple times, an injury that left him paralyzed from the legs down. Ford sued the city, a years-long journey that ended with a multi-million-dollar settlement. He went on to work on improving police and community relations and wrote a memoir about the experience. It's called An Unspeakable Hope: Brutality, Forgiveness, and Building a Better Future for My Son. He spoke with us about that terrible moment that changed his life forever.
They interrogated me for over 20 minutes on the side of a dark road. They threatened me. As I was afraid for my life, I locked my car doors. And one of the officers reached into the window, unlocking my door, opening the door, tried to pull me out of the vehicle. Out of fear, I panicked. I drove off. And one of the officers jumped inside of my vehicle on the passenger side, shooting me 5 times. And I remember one of the officers yanking me out of the vehicle, slamming me on the ground face down, handcuffing me behind my back. As I laid on the cold concrete, I remember the blood coming out of my mouth. I felt the blood coming out of my chest, and I could smell the gunpowder. That's when I realized they shot me, and I began to say over and over again, "Why did y'all shoot me?" During that time, one of the officers actually knelt next to my head and told me that he hoped that I would die.
I met Leon Ford 10 years ago, and to see the change in him from that moment to us speaking on the podcast is honestly one of the most amazing and humbling things that I've ever seen in my life. We've continued to interact after reconnecting with the podcast, and it continues in his activism to share the importance of therapy and mental health and forgiveness when it comes to not just victims of police brutality, but the communities as a whole. And one other part that I want to share as sort of an update on his story, which is amazing to me. Ford talked about the fact that he was recovering in the hospital from being shot by the police just a couple of floors above where his son was born. And his son was recovering from sort of a premature birth. And he talked about how important it was throughout his life to do what he was doing, not just for his son, but anybody else who's the victim. And I asked him this question long after the podcast, when we were sitting down and having coffee once. And I said, if you can look back on your life, because now you're running organizations, you fly all over the world giving speeches, none of this would have happened had you not been brutalized by police and lost the use of your legs. Do you regret it? Do you ever think about what your life would be otherwise? Do you think to yourself, if this had never happened to me, if this tragedy hadn't happened, maybe I wouldn't be where I am today? And he had such an amazing answer. He said, I stopped asking myself that question a long time ago. Part of mental health and part of forgiveness is accepting what is and not beating yourself up over and over again about why, and making the most of the days that you have. And I must say that has stuck with me long after that conversation and that coffee. You know, some of the issues that rarely make the headlines still seriously impact millions of Americans. One of those issues is the crisis in caregiving. Families across the country struggle with the emotional and financial stress of caring for young children, elderly relatives, and disabled loved ones who need help. Most of our institutions aren't built to support these efforts. So the challenge falls heavily on the shoulders of caregivers who often put their lives on hold to take somebody in. That's what happened to our guest, actress Yvette Nicole Brown. She won fame for her roles on shows like Community and Drake and Josh, but she interrupted her career to take care of her father after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. That experience led her to host a podcast series called Squeezed that featured the stories of a variety of caregivers. And she talked about how she made the decision to pause her work in Hollywood to care for her dad.
I didn't think about whether it would derail my career. I don't hold my career precious, and that doesn't mean that I'm not grateful for every opportunity I've been given, but I have a purpose on this earth that's bigger than being on television and in film or being famous or well known. I am someone that celebrates and supports people. I have a heart for people, and I can do that anywhere. So if God says it will happen no more in entertainment, and I took care of daddy, ended up having to go back to be a legal secretary, I would have done my call as a legal secretary. I would do my call at Starbucks as a barista. I do this wherever I go. So I was not concerned about my career at all. I don't care. My dad needed me.
You know, what I loved about Yvette's story is that it was so universal. I'd say of all the podcasts, we've done some really amazing ones, especially in 2024, but this was probably the podcast that I got the most personal feedback from. I had so many people come up to me or text me or DM me on Instagram and say, I found this story so powerful. I found this story so meaningful that giving up or putting your career in Hollywood on hold it seems like something most of us could never do. But I heard from people who are like, yeah, I left medical school because I had to care for my mom, or I stopped this career, or I moved my family. And so seeing that kind of sacrifice, seeing that kind of love is just absolutely amazing and astounding, and really one of the most moving things that I've heard on this podcast. And, you know, as an update, Yvette's father is still with us. She is still caring for him. She is going ahead to get married, as we sort of talked about on the show, and continues to do amazing charity work for caregivers across the country. And again, the stories I love the most are the ones that continue even beyond our podcast. We're going to take a short break right now. And when we come back, more of our look back on the best of a word. I'm Jason Johnson. Stay tuned.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
All right, we're all set for the party. I've trimmed the tree, hung the mistletoe, and paired all those weird-shaped knives and forks with the appropriate cheeses. And I plugged in the Bartesian.
Bartesian?
It's a home cocktail maker that makes over 60 premium cocktails, plus a whole lot of seasonal favorites, too. I just got it for $50 off. So, how about a Cosmopolitan or a mistletoe margarita?
I'm thirsty.
Watch. I just pop in a capsule, choose my strength, and...
Wow, it's beginning to feel more seasonal in here already.
If your holiday party doesn't have a bartender, then you become the bartender. Unless you've got a Bartesian, because Bartesian crafts every cocktail perfectly in as little as 30 seconds. And I just got it for $50 off.
'Tis the season to be jollier.
Add some holiday flavor to every celebration with the sleek, sophisticated home cocktail maker, Bartesian. Get $50 off any cocktail maker at bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. It's our final episode with Slate, and we're taking a look back at some of our favorite interviews. And Over the years, politics and policy has been the main issue of a lot of our best conversations. We've welcomed several brilliant historians, analysts, and thinkers on A Word. We've had Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ibram Kendi, Barry Williams, Michael Harriot. That's just naming a couple. Van Newkirk, Adam Sewer, Joy Reid. The list goes on and on. I've been super excited and proud about the kind of people we've had to come on and talk about politics. But one of my favorite political conversations of all time has got to be with Stacey Abrams. In case you didn't remember, Stacey Abrams ran for governor of Georgia in 2018 and lost to now Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. Kemp at the time was Georgia's Secretary of State and oversaw changes in election policy that seemed to tip the scales in his favor. Abrams fell short again in her rematch with Kemp in 2022, but her work in voter registration and mobilization efforts is still credited with scoring victories there for Biden in the 2020 presidential race and in 2021 for Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. Back in 2021, she and I talked a lot about the power of voting and what that means to Black folk in particular. But we also talked about its limits.
Voting is not magic. It is medicine. Magic makes all the bad disappear. Medicine mitigates the harm of the bad. And if we're lucky, it makes the bad eventually go away. But there are some illnesses, some diseases that are just so pervasive that all you can do is stall them. And you can attack the symptoms.
I love the idea that voting isn't magic, because I think all too often, especially in the context of what we just saw in the 2024 presidential elections, people have to realize, and a lot of people didn't turn out to vote in 2024. They were despondent, frustrated, didn't think the parties make a difference. And part of that, I think, is because people think voting is magic. And Stacey Abrams points out that it's not going to cure anything. It's just medicine. And just like any other kind of medicine, it's one part of what you have to do to heal yourself. If you have a broken leg, the doctor can give you some medicine, but you've also got to do physical therapy. And I think that her comments are a wonderful lesson moving forward, because gotta admit, this country's going to be sick for a while with this new administration, and who knows what could come afterwards. And if we think that we can just vote our way out of Trump 2.0 and out of this administration and what they want to bring on this country, we will be making a grave error. It's not going to be magic. It's going to take some hardcore medicine. Georgia has been the topic of a lot of our episodes on A Word. We talk to activists down there. We talk to organizers down there. And I got to be honest with you, we found that the problems that Georgia was facing and the issues that Georgia was going through policy-wise, gerrymandering-wise, gentrification-wise, police brutality-wise, ended up being reflective of a lot of the country. And one of my favorite guests to have on to talk about Georgia was Nsé Ufot. The great thing about Nsé is I think she and Elie Mystal may actually have the honor of being guests the most times on A Word. I think they were both on 2 or 3 different times on the podcast. And we talked to Nsé in a really great episode in 2023 called The Donald Went Down to Georgia. And we talked about the investigation into Trump's scheme to steal the 2020 election. This is what she had to say at the time.
I think that there is a fiction that we've all been sort of participating in and holding up about where the line is, what the expectation is of the president of the United States. And the strength of our institutions, I think, is another thing that, yes, having a uniquely terrible, once in a generation head of state is awful, should be avoided. And I do not think that people appreciate the vastness of the organizing and the conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
One of the things I love about what Nsé said is that it's sort of reflective of how bad and how devious Trump's plans were, and highlights how frustrating and disappointing it is that in the wake of the 2024 presidential election, almost all these investigations are being dropped. Jack Smith is dropping his cases. Florida cases are being dropped. Tish James is continuing. But most of the major investigations into Trump's corruption have been dropped. And it's particularly galling when we consider that he put so much effort into trying to steal a previous election, and that a lot of his motivation for running for re-election was to avoid the consequences of these various investigations. And I think it's important to remember and keep Nsé's sort of voice and warnings in our ears going forward for this reason. The sophistication that we may have seen in 2020 will only be increased heading forward. If Trump tried to steal an election in 2020, and I heard a lot of conspiracy theorists who think that he stole 2024, I'm not of that mindset. I think 2024 came down to really, really low turnout in major urban centers and Kamala Harris only having 100 days to dig herself out of a hole that Joe Biden put her in. But the reality is, if he did it once before, we have to assume that now that he is back in power, he will try even harder to not just have a conspiracy to suppress the vote, but make it impossible for him to be voted out of office. And that's a warning that we all have to take into consideration moving forward. Now, that wasn't the only conversation that gives us a sense of deja vu and prepares us for oncoming and upcoming events. Legal analyst and author Elie Mystal was one of our most frequent guests, as I said, over the years. He joined us recently this summer to discuss the runaway Supreme Court, and his thoughts were eerily prophetic.
First, the worst case scenario, there is no preparing. The scenario where Trump wins, has a House, has the Senate, puts Stephen Miller, unreconstructed racists like Stephen Miller as the AG. There's no preparing for that. The preparedness is get on a train and leave. Montreal is beautiful this time of year. Like that's the preparedness for the actual worst case scenario. Yeah, I don't got anything for that.
This is the scary thing about what Elie said. It was essentially the worst case scenario. We didn't think that was likely at the time, but we had the worst case scenario. Donald Trump was elected president. Donald Trump controls the Senate. And while it's a very, very thin margin, Republicans control the House as well. So there's basically no federal institutional check on anything that Donald Trump wants to do. And while Elie's suggestion was to basically leave the country, and that's not an option that everybody has, I do think it's important to remember that as long as we're here, we have to still fight. We have to recognize that the way that you're going to put pressure on this new administration, the way that you have to live your life now, can't be to be obsessed with just voting. It has to be activism. It has to be pressure. It has to be shame. It has to be different ways and levels of engagement. I'll also tell you this as an update. Elie Mystal has a brand new book coming out in the spring, which we're going to be really excited. We're going to have him come on and talk about that, called Bad Law. And it's 10 bad laws that are ruining the country. So if you like the tone of his previous book, you're definitely going to love the tone of this new one. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up our review of The Best of a Word. I'm Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. We're ending our time as a Slate podcast and taking the opportunity to look back at some of our favorite interviews and to remember it hasn't all been gloom and doom. We have had the chance on A Word to talk to a number of artists and writers and other creative thinkers who have shared the magic of their work and their process with us. We got to talk to David Alan Grier. We got to talk to stars from Chevalier and Interview with a Vampire. I mean, there's a lot of different shows that I got to talk to people from. And I'm really excited about not only those conversations, but the inspiration that they gave a lot of the listeners about, hey, how do you be creative? How do you have fun? How do you engage the sort of juices that might flow through your system that are deeper than just sitting in your office or sitting in your home working all day? And in that, I got to play in one of my favorite areas, which is comic books and cartoons and science fiction. One of those conversations that I think encapsulated a lot of that energy was my conversation with costume designer and concept artist Phil Boutte. Now, look, you may not know his name, but you've definitely seen his work. He's a leading creator who has shaped the look of films like A Wrinkle in Time, Peter Pan and Wendy, Bad Boys Ride or Die. He even helped develop the comic book for the new Cross series on Amazon Prime. His most famous work was probably Black Panther and Wakanda Forever. And he talked with us about his work on the film with Oscar-winning costume designer Ruth Carter and how that expanded his vision and his understanding of African culture.
The key thing was trying to be respectful. Ruth had done a bunch of research because she had done the reboot of Roots. So she had gone to Africa. All across our walls, there were tons of different tribes and like specific research about who they were, and not just like learning them by name, but learning like these beads are this color because of this, and these people do this because of this, and they put clay in their hair because of that. So it was like really the first time for me where I kind of identified, or I was able to start to break down Africa's history and not from like a westernized point of view, or not from a visual of just like not understanding it.
Phil is one of my favorite people. He is amazing creative. He's so sincere in his work. But one of the things that really stuck out in that conversation is that if you are Black and you're into Star Wars and you're into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and you're into DC and you're into all these comic book things, it's important to have people behind the cameras as well, making your reality part of the images that you're consuming. And that's what Phil does. Even with guidance from other people, he takes aspects of African-American heart and soul and energy and culture and African soul and energy and culture and puts it into everything he does. And it makes this a much brighter future for those of us like myself who have graphic novels coming out, wink, wink, something that's going to be coming hopefully in 2025. And for those of us who just want to consume art. So again, absolutely meaningful and definitely worth a follow. While we did a deep dive into nerd culture, and specifically Black nerd culture on a word, we had great conversations with people outside the world of nerddom. Comedian Leslie Jones found stardom as a writer and performer on Saturday Night Live. She parlayed that opportunity into gigs across the media landscape, including her unlikely success as an Olympic commentator, and she was awesome. Leslie Jones joined us last year to talk about her career and her memoir, Leslie Effing Jones. And she explained that while she's now largely famous for just being Leslie Jones, getting to a place where she could turn down stereotypical roles and badly written scripts to just be herself as a comedian was a real process.
If these people would have found me in my 20s and 30s, I would have did the whole script. I'd have did all that shit because I wanted to be famous, but that wasn't destined for me. And it was shown to me that you are a square that they're trying to fit into a circle, and that's not what's going to happen. And you need to know who you are. So of course I wasn't going to make it big because I am different. I am a different entity. So I had to realize who I was first. And you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself because if I would have got found in my 20s and 30s, I probably would have burnt out. I probably would have been one of them stars that you don't even fucking remember no more. And it's so much better because I did all the things that if all those things would have worked for me, I would be doing them, but they didn't. So I had to find out who I was and how I fit into this industry. I'll put it as a good example. I had a friend tell me one time, because I was so mad I couldn't find shoes because my feet are so big. I couldn't find some shoes. And I was crying about it. And I was just like, my fucking feet, they're fucking big. I'm not gonna find no fucking shoes. And my friend was like, okay, so what you want to do? You want to cut your feet off? Like you want to cut them off? But you ain't gonna be able to walk, bitch, because your feet balance you out. Like, you big bitch, you can't have a size 6. You know what I'm saying? And that is a realization of I'm not going to be able to change the way I look. I'm not going to be able to change the way I sound. I'm not going to be able to change the shit that comes out of me. So I might as well make this the person. So it's more of like, you have no option. This is what's here. And I know what I'm giving you is quality shit. And sometimes a lot of these entities don't know what they really want until they see it, until you show them and you show them that it works. That's all it is. You just have to believe in yourself. You have to know yourself. And you definitely have to know yourself before they get a hold of you, because if you don't, they will sculpt you into what the fuck they want. And most likely it's not something that you're going to like. Yeah, that's what basically just accepting yourself.
I loved hearing that from Leslie Jones. And anyone who listened to that podcast the first time, you can certainly go back and listen to it again. My excitement was palpable in talking to her because she isn't the sort of traditional comedian. And she talked about the fact that she was so successful, but sort of unknown and successful. You know, she came into Saturday Night Live as a successful, I'm making a living as a comic already. I'm not a kid. But I think the other amazing thing about that conversation is it's a reminder for everybody listening to the show now that, you got to believe in yourself. And that's not just one of those sort of corny cliches, right? Even famous people have to tell themselves, I got to believe in me. I got to believe in my own messaging. I got to believe in my own ideas. I got to believe in my own passions. And there is a joy and a confidence that comes from even discovering your success later in life. And I love how she talks about that, if this had happened in her 20s, she probably wouldn't be able to embrace it and run with it the way she has as now somebody in her 50s. So another example of a Black woman becoming that's, not Michelle Obama, was Quinta Brunson. And we had an amazing conversation with her right after the premiere of Abbott Elementary, before it became the sort of full sensation that it is today. It's now probably arguably one of the most sort of iconic sitcoms, certainly in the last 20 to 25 years in the United States. And Quinta had this wonderful perspective, even at that point in her career, about why it was important for her to do the kind of work she wanted to do, even though at that time she had only sort of been doing sketch comedy. She had been doing, comedy clips here and there. And to take all of that passion that she was putting into these smaller projects and turn it into something that was going to be meaningful to her, and how she advised other people to pursue that passion.
You have to at least try. If there is a burning, undeniable, obsessive passion in you over this stuff, that's how I was. I was obsessed. It was 24/7 comedy from top to bottom in every form and all its inceptions. And it is a burning obsession. And depending on where you're coming from, you may be told from your work, from your friends who just are like, just girl, come be a nurse, girl. We living good over here. Yes. But something in me, if I don't just try, I can't, I don't know. That'll be burning there forever. And I don't want it to consume me. I want to fulfill that. You just have to at least try. Take one leap and go at your own pace. Some of my smallest leaps were taking an improv class in college. That was a leap for me at the time. None of my friends were doing that. Like, my friends were doing, all the other things that I was doing too, all the other extracurriculars. And I was like, I kind of want to go take this improv class with all these white nerds. And my friends were like, why? And I'm like, because I don't know, something's telling me to go over there and do that and just see how it feels. Take the leap. And I think that's what I would say. Trust that burn. And if you don't have that burn, maybe you shouldn't be doing it, because that burn is the only thing that kind of keeps you going at some point.
I love this because, one of the best things about doing a word is it's not just the people you meet. It's not just the conversations you have, but it's the universality of what people say. If you want to be the greatest chef, if you want to be the greatest insurance salesman, you probably have to have some burning passion. And I love that she says, like, look, if you don't have the passion for this, it probably isn't the thing you're going to do, or you're not going to be happy doing it, because sometimes passion is the only thing that can keep you going. And I love to see that a show as great as Abbott Elementary is continuing to go. And frankly, to think that now, quietly, subtly, one of the most popular sitcoms in America today is a Black show. No one ever calls Abbott Elementary a Black show, but it is a Black show. And, even 15 or 20 years ago, I don't think anyone could have gotten away with that. But it was Quinta's passion and her vision to keep trying, keep banging her head up against the wall until she turned that into a reality. And I think that's something we can all appreciate, and definitely appreciate whenever we watch it on Hulu. We're going to wrap up today's show with a really recent guest. I had the opportunity to talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is not only a world-renowned scientist, he's not only sort of like on the pantheon of blurs up there with Nichelle Nichols and LeVar Burton and all sorts of famous scientists and actors and everything else like that. But he's also a really good writer, and he is an educator. And he spends a lot of time telling us about the relationship between our daily reality and the stars, telling us everything from, you can be a speck in a universe to being a black hole. We're all sort of connected in these amazing ways. And the joy of taking the reality of science and flipping that occasionally into pop culture. Here's what he had to say about what it would be like if we always thought about the science and the pop culture at the same time.
So take, for example, Star Wars Force Awakens. Mm-hmm. They have the new and improved Death Star, and it nestles up next to a real star, sucks out all the energy, and now it can destroy all the planets of a star system, not just one, because it has the energy of a star.
Yes.
Okay? Now befitting its name, Death Star. All right, so a few starter comments, which is not even my main comment. First of all, if you suck all the energy out of a star and put it in another place, you become that star. That's what energy does when it's in that concentration, in that volume. So, but let's assume they have some futuristic way to contain it. Fine. Second, if you don't like people living on a planet, why do you have to blow up the planet? I mean, what? Don't you want to use the planet when you're done? That is not good military sense. In fact, it's military stupidity. Okay, so that's it. Third, you can calculate how much energy is in a star. It's enough energy to destroy 1,000 planets, not just 5 or 6, however many they destroyed near the end of that film. So had they done the math, the Death Star could have been way more diabolical than as displayed. And that pissed me off.
So as you can tell, he and I had a great time talking about Star Wars. We talked a lot about Star Wars, but it wasn't just the idea of Star Wars. It was the idea, the larger context was he was also saying, hey, look, I don't want to be that guy in the movie theater. I'm not the guy who ruins everything. But I have to say, science is fun. Art is fun. These two things don't have to be in conflict. We can take the science of our world and turn that into better movies and better shows. Just like many of my other guests have said, we can take the reality of the Black experience, the diverse experience, the queer experience, the life experience, and we can turn that into beautiful art and music and song and whatever it else we want to create in this world. And believe it or not, creating something new in this world kind of takes us to the close of our show. This is going to be it for Word on Slate. As I said at the top of the show, look, we are not ending. A Word will relaunch in February of 2025. And I gotta say, after years of hearing all sorts of inspiring writers and artists and creatives and political people, I'm doing what they have told all of us to do. Follow your passions, follow your dreams, have that thing burning inside of you. Recognize that the skills that you have in a practical, scientific way can also translate over into art. And that's what we'll be doing as we expand A Word into some brand new, really exciting places that I can't wait to tell you about. In the meantime, we'll be running classic episodes and clips from A Word on my Instagram and on Blue Sky. So I encourage everybody, if you're listening right now, go on Instagram and follow me at @DrJason Politics. That's DrJason Politics on Instagram, or on Blue Sky at @DrJasonJohnson. Thank you so much for listening. Can't wait to see you next year. Enjoy A Word. Goodbye, everybody. This episode was produced by Christy Taiwo Makanjula. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Slate Audio. Our theme music was produced by Don Will. I'm Jason Johnson. Thank you so much for your present and future support of A Word.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University. Value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.